My fiancée blindsided me with a prenup at a $90 steak dinner, and her friends actually applauded. Her lawyer slid a 10-page document across the table to take my $2.1M vineyard and my father's inheritance. I didn't say a word. I just placed a red folder on the table with a Thursday 3:47 p.m. timestamp. Her face turned ghost white when her own attorney read the clause excluding every asset permanently. My name is Marcus. I'm 41 years old. I built a boutique financial advisory firm from nothing, started it at 34 with 2 clients, a rented desk, and a securities law background that took me 8 years to earn. By the time I met Rachel, the firm had grown into something real. Mid-8 figures in assets under management, held quietly, kept private. I don't talk about money at dinner parties. I never have. Rachel Caldwell is different. She inherited her wealth at 25 when the Caldwell Family Trust activated. No employment history. A social calendar that functions like a second job. She is not a bad person, or at least, I spent 14 months telling myself that. She is simply a person who has never had to build anything, and has quietly never forgiven the people around her who have. We met at a wine event in the city. She was charming, specific, funny in a dry way I wasn't expecting. I proposed after 11 months. I meant it. What I didn't notice fast enough, or chose not to, was the architecture underneath the charm. Rachel's mother called me her little project at a dinner party about 6 months in, smiled through it, corrected herself immediately. I laughed it off. But that kind of slip doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a conversation that happened before you walked in the room. I have a professional habit I picked up from years in securities law. I keep a very tidy paper trail. Dates, communications, account records. I document things the way other people breathe automatically, without thinking about it. At the time, I thought it was just good practice. It turned out to be the most important habit I have ever had. 6 months into our engagement, Rachel started referencing our finances in front of her friends. Casually, conversationally, as if the decisions had already been made. I heard secondhand through a realtor who mentioned it to a mutual contact that Rachel had told her we'd be transferring the vineyard account to a joint holding once we were married. The vineyard account is a separate business asset. It has always been held inside my firm's entity structure. Rachel and I had never once discussed it. She had described it to at least 2 people as future joint property. I want to be precise about this. She wasn't asking. She was announcing. That was the moment I called Dr. Elias Monroe. Dr. Elias Monroe is an estate attorney. He specializes in asset protection law, and he has been my personal counsel for 6 years. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon in early October, 3 weeks before the Swan dinner, and I told him I needed to come in. Here is what happened that Tuesday. I came home early from the office. The house was quiet. Rachel was out lunch with friends, she'd texted. I walked past the home office and noticed the printer light was on. Still running, I stepped inside. 4 pages were already in the tray. 2 more were printing. I picked them up. Harold Fitch, attorney at law. His letterhead, top of the first page. A prenup draft, 6 pages at that point, 4 more queued behind them. Dated 3 weeks prior. Which meant this had been in motion since before Rachel and I had celebrated our 1-year engagement anniversary with a weekend in Napa. I stood in that office and read every page. The language was careful, specific. One clause in particular stopped me, an equitable division provision covering any assets held in a sole proprietor or single-member business entity. The clause was retroactive. Not from the date of marriage, not from the date of engagement. Retroactive to any asset I currently held. That language didn't happen by accident. Someone told Harold exactly what to target, and Harold had written it precisely enough to capture everything inside my firm's entity structure, including the vineyard account, without naming any of it directly. Rachel had described that account as future joint property to a realtor. Now I was holding the legal mechanism she intended to use to make that true. I set the pages back in the printer tray exactly as I found them. I straightened the stack. I walked out. I did not change a single thing in my behavior that evening, but I photographed every page before I left the room. I met Monroe at his office the next morning with the photographs on my phone and the vineyard account statements in a folder. He read everything without speaking. When he finished, he set the phone face down on his desk, looked up, and said, "She's been planning this for at least 4 months. Not a question." I asked him how bad it was. He told me the truth. The equitable division clause was technically legal under California law. Aggressive, unusually broad for a prenup filing, but defensible in court if Rachel's team argued it hard enough. California's separate property presumptions would protect some of what I had, but not cleanly, not quickly, and not without a fight that could take years and cost a significant percentage of everything it was trying to protect. Then he told me there was a cleaner option: a federal sovereign shelter trust. Monroe walked me through it without making me feel like I was in a classroom. The structure places assets inside a federally recognized trust entity, which sits entirely outside the jurisdiction of standard California marital property law. A prenup signed or unsigned cannot reach it. No marital agreement of any kind can. The assets inside are not subject to equitable division because they are no longer held by me personally. They are held by the trust. There is a difference, and that difference is the entire ballgame. He used one phrase I wrote down on the notepad in front of me: federal sovereign shelter status. I told him to file it. Monroe slid a single document across his desk. "I'll need signatures on 3 pages, he said. "And I'd like to have this submitted before end of week." I picked up the pen. We met again on Thursday afternoon. I brought the account documents, the firm's equity records, and the titles on 2 residential properties, one of which I had inherited from my father 11 years ago. Monroe's paralegal had the trust declaration ready. We went through it line by line. At 3:47 p.m., Monroe submitted the filing: the boutique firm's equity, the vineyard account, both residential properties. All of it transferred into the trust before I had eaten dinner that evening. There was one addition: Monroe recommended a rider attached to the trust declaration called an irrevocable exclusion clause. It permanently excluded every listed asset from the scope of any current or future marital agreement. Not temporarily, not conditionally. Permanently. Monroe printed the filing confirmation. I checked the timestamp. Thursday, 3:47 p.m. That evening I drove home, cooked dinner, and said nothing. The prenup draft was still sitting in the home office printer tray where I had left it. Rachel was in the kitchen talking about the Swan reservation, how excited she was, how perfect the view would be. I had 3 days before the dinner. I spent them watching Rachel smile. 2 days before the dinner, Rachel brought up the prenup. Not as a confession, not as a conversation, as a formality. We were in the kitchen after dinner. She was pouring a second glass of wine, back turned to me. Voice completely casual, the tone she uses when she wants something to sound smaller than it is. "I wanted to mention," she said, "that Harold is going to put together some paperwork for us. A prenup. It's just standard stuff. Every couple in our situation does it." I asked her when she had decided this. She turned around and smiled. "It protects us both, Marcus. It's not a big deal." I asked if Harold would be at the Swan dinner. A half-second pause. "The kind you only catch if you're looking for it. He might stop by," she said. Briefly. I told her I'd like to see the paperwork before any dinner. That's when her voice changed. Not loud. Rachel doesn't do loud. She went quiet and precise, which is worse. "You know what? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're being paranoid. You make everything into something. This is literally just paperwork, and you're already treating it like an attack." She set her wine glass down. "This is exactly why we need a prenup, Marcus. Because you're so emotionally reactive." She kissed me on the cheek before she went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then I went to the home office, opened my email, and drafted a message to the Swan venue coordinator. I didn't send it yet, but I wrote it. The dinner invitation went out the following morning. A group text: Rachel, Diane, Meredith, Cora, Tess, and Harold. The message said, "Celebrating us 6 months to the wedding. Swan Rooftop, Saturday, 7 p.m. So excited to share this evening with the people I love most." I was not on that text thread. I found out about it because Rachel forwarded it to me separately, 30 minutes later, with a single line: "Can't wait. Dress nice." I looked at that guest list and understood the geometry of Saturday night. 6 people, all from Rachel's world. The Caldwell family has a standing reservation history at Swan. The maitre d' knows Rachel by name, knows her mother, knows the table they prefer. A man who causes a scene at that restaurant, in front of those witnesses, at that table, does not come out of it looking reasonable. Rachel had built a room where the social cost of saying no would fall entirely on me. She had 36 hours left to believe that plan was going to work. The red folder was already packed in my bag. Swan sits on the 14th floor of a building 2 blocks from the water. The rooftop terrace has a clear view of the Bay Bridge on a good night, and Saturday was a good night. I arrived at 7 on the dot and gave my name to the host. She walked me to a private corner section, Rachel's preferred table, the one the Caldwell family has held a standing reservation for since before I knew any of them. They were all already seated, Rachel at the head, Diane and Meredith to her left, Cora and Tess to her right, one empty chair facing Rachel, between two of her friends, positioned so that every person at the table would have a direct sightline to whoever sat in it. Harold arrived 3 minutes after I did, briefcase in hand, apologizing lightly for traffic. Rachel introduced him as our family attorney. She said it the way you'd say our accountant or our contractor, a shared resource, a mutual arrangement. I ordered sparkling water. I did not open the menu. Harold set his briefcase on the floor beside his chair, unclasped it, and lifted out a folder before the bread arrived. He placed it in front of my plate with the practiced ease of someone who has delivered paperwork at dinner tables before. 10 pages, spiral-bound, sticky note tabs marking every signature line, a pin clipped to the cover. Diane began to clap. Light, measured applause 4 beats, maybe 5. Meredith joined in. Tess smiled at Rachel like she'd just done something brave. Finally, Diane said, "This is so smart, Rach." Harold straightened the folder toward me and began his overview in the same tone a pharmacist uses to explain dosage instructions. Equitable division of business entities upon dissolution of marriage. Assets held in sole proprietor or single-member structures, subject to recharacterization as marital property. The vineyard account referenced, not by name, but by description precise enough that I knew exactly what it meant. A legal buffet. Every asset I had spent a decade building. Arranged on a white tablecloth for selection. Rachel leaned toward me slightly. "This isn't a fight," she said, just low enough that only I could hear. "It's just protection. For both of us." Diane, louder. "Come on, Marcus. It's not a big deal." I let Harold finish. Then I put my hand flat on the folder. "I have some documents, too," I said. I reached under my chair and placed a red folder on the table next to Harold's. I had been calling it the Apocalypse folder in my head since the night I assembled it. I never said that out loud. I just set it down, opened the cover, and slid the top document across the tablecloth to Harold. The Federal Sovereign Shelter Trust Declaration. Filing confirmation paperclip to the front page, timestamp visible at the top right corner. Thursday, 3:47 p.m. Harold picked it up. He read the first page. He turned to the second. His expression did not change. Harold is a professional, and professionals don't let their expressions change at dinner tables. But he slowed down. He read the second page twice. Then he set the document flat in front of him and looked at it without picking it up again. The table waited. Diane had stopped clapping. Rachel said, "What is that?" Harold did not answer her immediately. He turned to page 3. Then page 4, the irrevocable exclusion clause, highlighted in yellow, one dense paragraph that said everything that needed to be said. He set the pages down. 11 seconds of silence. I counted. Harold said absolutely nothing for 11 seconds. "I want to tell you something about the night before the Swan dinner." After I packed the red folder into my bag, I sat at the kitchen table for a while. The house was quiet. Rachel was already upstairs. I had a clean option in front of me. I had known it since Thursday afternoon when Monroe submitted the filing. I could call off the engagement quietly. Return the ring by courier. Walk away with my assets fully protected. No confrontation, no audience, no scene at a restaurant where Rachel's family has held a table for 15 years. I thought about it seriously. Then, I thought about the retroactive clause Harold had drafted. The precision of it, how carefully it had been written to reach inside my firm's entity structure without naming anything directly. That clause didn't get written in a week. Someone had spent real time on it. Someone had provided Harold with enough detail about my assets to build a legal instrument specifically shaped around them. And that someone had been sitting across from me at dinner for 14 months, asking about my firm, asking about the vineyard, asking in the easy, interested way that people ask when they want you to think they're just curious. I thought about Rachel telling that realtor the vineyard account would be transferred after we married. Not asking. Announcing. I thought about her mother calling me her little project. I thought about 14 months of small moments I had filed away without acting on, because I was willing to believe the generous interpretation. Every time, I picked up my phone. I opened the draft email to the Swan venue coordinator, the one I had written 2 nights earlier and not yet sent. I read it once. I sent it. The wedding reservation was canceled at 11:02 p.m. The deposit was non-refundable. I had already calculated that and decided it was the cost of clarity. I didn't bring the red folder to Swan to win an argument. I brought it because Rachel had assembled 6 witnesses to watch me sign something. I needed those same 6 witnesses to see exactly who she was when the plan didn't work. I zipped the folder into my bag and went to bed. Here is what I would have lost if I had signed Harold's prenup without the trust already filed. The vineyard account, a business asset I had built over 9 years, currently valued at approximately $2.1 million. My firm's equity, the result of 8 years of work started from a rented desk and 2 clients. 2 residential properties, including one my father left me. The retroactive language in Harold's clause would have reached all of it not because California law required it to, but because Rachel's team had written it broadly enough that contesting it would have meant years of litigation, significant legal costs, and outcomes that Monroe described as defensible but not guaranteed. Monroe had sent me an email Friday morning, the day after filing. I read it again that Saturday at the kitchen table before I left for Swan. It said, "The irrevocable exclusion clause makes this clean. Harold will have nothing to argue." I folded that email, put it in the red folder, and drove to the restaurant. Harold broke the silence himself. He did not look at me when he spoke. He looked at Rachel. That told me everything about what he had just read. When an attorney stops performing for the opposing party and turns to his own client, it means the problem has changed shape. "Rachel," he said, "the assets listed in the prenup, the business equity, the vineyard account, the residential properties, they're no longer held by Marcus personally." Rachel's expression stayed composed. "Practiced? What does that mean?" "They've been transferred into a federal sovereign shelter trust." Harold kept his voice even. "Filed Thursday. The trust carries federal sovereign shelter status, which means it sits outside California marital property jurisdiction entirely. A prenup, this prenup, any prenup doesn't reach assets held inside that structure." A beat of silence. "That can't be right," Rachel said. "It is," Harold said, quietly, with the specific flatness of a professional who is not going to say it twice. Rachel looked at me for the first time since Harold had started talking. The composed expression was still there, but something behind it had shifted, a very small recalibration, like a building settling in a way that isn't visible yet but will be. "Harold." Her voice was still controlled, still smooth. "Tell him the trust is revocable." The table waited. Harold said nothing. I opened the red folder to page 4. The irrevocable exclusion clause was highlighted in yellow, a single dense paragraph, clean and unambiguous. I turned the folder toward Harold and read one line aloud. "The clause permanently excluding all listed assets from the scope of any current or future marital agreement. Not suspended. Not conditional. Permanent." I closed the folder. I looked at Rachel. "Harold put together a legal buffet tonight," I said. "Every asset I've built, arranged on the table for you to choose from. The problem is I cleared the table 3 days ago." Nobody said anything. Then Diane said, "Wait, what does that mean?" Nobody answered her either. Rachel moved fast when she understood that Harold wasn't going to help her. "Marcus." Her voice dropped, the tone she uses when she wants to signal reasonableness. "This is a misunderstanding. We can talk about this privately. You don't need to make this into something." I didn't respond. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said. Still quiet, but the edge was there now, just beneath the surface, starting to show. In front of everyone. I watched her. I didn't move. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." Her voice was climbing slightly, the practiced control starting to cost her something. "You're paranoid. You're reactive. You've always been like this. This is literally why we needed the prenup. Because you make everything into an attack." Meredith shifted in her seat. "She started to say something, Rachel. Maybe we should," and Rachel turned toward her with a look sharp enough that Meredith stopped mid-sentence. The unified front had a crack in it now. Small, visible. Harold had been quietly repacking his briefcase. He set his hand on Rachel's arm, not warmly, professionally, the way an attorney touches a client they are about to advise against something. "Rachel," he said, "I need to advise you to stop talking." I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I reached into the inside pocket and placed my phone on the white tablecloth, screen up, facing Rachel. The email to the Swan venue coordinator was open, sent at 11:02 p.m. the previous evening. "Wedding reservation. Cancelled. The non-refundable deposit line visible at the bottom. I came here tonight to let you finish what you started," I said. "In front of the people you brought to watch. Now I'm finishing something too." I looked at Rachel for a moment. Her eyes were moving between my face and the phone and Harold's closed briefcase and the prenup folder still sitting untouched on the white tablecloth. Harold's folder, not mine. Mine was already in my bag. "Keep the ring, Rachel," I said. "I already kept everything that matters." I put on my jacket and walked to the elevator. The $90 entree I had never touched was still on the table behind me. The prenup folder was still on the white tablecloth. The red folder was not. My car was downstairs by the time the elevator reached the lobby. The first text from Rachel came before I reached the street. By the time I got home, there were 23. I know because I counted them the following morning, in the cold light of a day with nothing scheduled and nowhere to be. I didn't read them that night. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter, put the red folder on the table, and made coffee. The texts moved in a pattern I recognized. The first few were confusion short, punctuation heavy, the kind you send when you're still at the table and haven't decided what to feel yet. Then anger. Then a longer message, more composed. The kind Rachel writes when she has had time to reconstruct her position and wants you to believe the composed version is the real one. Then, after midnight, something different. Shorter again. Quieter. The last one read, "I didn't think you'd actually leave." There were also 12 missed calls. I didn't return any of them. Meredith sent 3 texts over the following 2 days. Apologetic, careful, the kind of messages people send when they witness something they didn't expect and aren't sure where their loyalty lands now. She called Rachel's behavior that night a lot. I appreciated the honesty. I didn't respond. Harold sent a single email on Sunday evening. 4 sentences, terse and professional. He was withdrawing from representation of the matter. He wished me well. He suggested I have my own counsel review any further correspondence from the Caldwell family, and he noted that the prenup had been formally withdrawn. I forwarded that email to Monroe on Monday morning. Monroe called me back within the hour. "Clean exit," he said. "The trust is solid. Harold knows it, that's why he withdrew." I thanked him and hung up. Here is what I lost. 14 months. A version of a future I had, in some part, genuinely wanted. The $38,000 I had spent on a Cartier solitaire that was currently sitting on Rachel's finger in a house I was not in. A wedding deposit that had already been processed as non-refundable and would not be coming back. I have accounted for all of it. I found I could. Here is what I kept. The boutique firm. The Vineyard account fully sheltered, untouched, sitting inside a federal sovereign shelter trust that Harold Fitch, attorney at law, had read 4 pages of before he put it down and said nothing for 11 seconds. 2 residential properties, including the one my father left me. My paper trail, which remains, as it has always been, very tidy. The Vineyard issued its quarterly yield the following week. It tasted fine.